ọmọ ogun kì í ṣọ̀lẹ, ẹ bẹ̀rẹ̀ gbẹ́rù o, Olúwa ń bẹ fún wa, ẹ tẹra mọ́ṣẹ́ o. Thank you, sirs. Ẹgbà anthem. Lórí òkè àti pẹ̀tẹ́lẹ̀. Thank you. Please, let's be seated. May I invite Reverend Tunde Dokumo to say the opening prayer. Reverend Dokumo.
Our Father who art in heaven, please may we rise. My apologies. Our Father who art in heaven, we bring you praise today as always. We invite you to this gathering, the annual lecture in memory of a legal icon in his days and the founding chairman of Abeokuta Club, Chief Shobo Shuemimo, SAN, the Jaguno of Egbaland, whose legacies has remained indelible in the history of human endeavors. We also want to thank you for joining messages for our guest speaker today, as well as the chairman of today's assembly, who radiates in professional excellence. Be thou exalted in Jesus' precious name. Father, we thank you. We ask that everyone seated here receive your grace as benefits of this lecture, and as we shall be returning to our destinations, Lord, we ask that your goodness and your peace continue to abide with every one of us. So we have prayed in the name of the Father, in the name of the Son, and in the name of the Holy Spirit. Amen and amen.
Right. Thank you, Reverend Dokumo. I would like to call on Alhaji Nuruddin Oyedele to recognize the dignitaries here present. Let me bring the, I'll bring.
My president, the president of Abeokuta Club, the man that is moving stones, blocks, rocks. I congratulate you. Dr. Adewale Adeola, the #1 member of Abeokuta Club. Kindly give me a round of applause. Just like I said earlier on, he knew she ojoro because there's no time. But I will recognize, I will take that of the, twice I will do that of the chairman of the occasion. Because one is a member of the club, and two is my immediate past president. Don't put word into my mouth. So, sir, I will use Baba's name to say good afternoon to all our elders, members, board of trustees, live vice presidents, past presidents, Baba, Honorable Justice Gapsiu Ademola Bakri, OON. Please stand up for recognition. So, sir, we thank you very much, sir, for being here today. You're always there for us. Baba Adiwolu, Baba Bakri, Baba, all of you, all our elders, for being here with us. You are the Igilenyo Bawa, and God Almighty will keep on sustaining you for the years to come. So I also want to recognize specially to all our past presidents. I can see Chief Adeni Ilasaki. I can see Engineer Tokumbo Debumi, who was not lucky enough to attend Premier Grammar School. Because some of us were lucky, sir. So Engineer Debumi, you are welcome. I also want to recognize the presence of oh, okay. 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 Baba Shobo Shuemimo was the first president of Abeokuta Club for 13 years, Abisa. 13 years. So first thing first, they were holding meetings in their house before they came to Abeokuta here. That family, even in the early days, Mama will come here. So may her gentle soul rest in perfect peace. So the family is being represented by Mrs. Efunike Anima Shaun Ni Shuwemimo. We have many Shuwemimos in Abeokuta Club. But Ashofela Shuwemimo, we have Sobio, all of them, you are all recognized as. You're welcome, sir. So, gentlemen, let me make do with all that I've said. All members of Abeokuta Club, wherever you may be, let us say, Ireo, Ireo, Ireo. The chairman of today is an Imo Elisiman, Akulara Ajeji. I'm just meeting him for the first time. Reverend Dr. Babatunde Lemo, a former deputy governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, and a former managing director of Wema Bank PLC. So he's a proud son of Imo land. He's doing us proud. He's doing Egbaland proud. So when the president told him, he said, the program was very tight. He said, Abeokuta Club is my club. So what can I do? He said he will shift all assignment for today and come back and come here. And he came since yesterday. Thank you so much. Hello, kí lẹ tún sọ ńbẹ̀ yẹn o? Kí lẹ tún sọ ńbẹ̀ yẹn o? And also, their guest lecturer, I wouldn't know because the people there, where they say them people, the economic advisor team to the president, deputy governor to the Central Bank of Nigeria, these are the people, the high flyers, the young personalities, high flyers. Those people are the top, doing good things for Nigeria. May God Almighty continue to bless you. So we have, as our speaker today, the theme is Imperatives of Nigeria's Regeneration. And our guest speaker is no other person than Professor Doyin Salami from Lagos Business School. You're welcome, sir. Thank you all, and thank you, Mr. Oluwo Itesi. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Elijah. Right now, we'll have a short welcome address from the President Abeokuta Club, Dr. Adewale Adeola.
On behalf of the Life President, Chief Abudu, the trustees, executive, and members of Abeokuta Club, I would like to welcome the chairman and guest speaker, Professor Salami, to this lecture. Abeokuta Club do have this lecture annually in honor of our first president, Chief Shobo Shuemimo. Is our own little way in charting way forward for Nigeria. In the past, we've had the past Inspector General of Police, MD Yusufu. We had the founder of Guarantee Trust in the past, Mr. Fola Adeola. We've had people like Reverend Tunde Lemo, Professor Oloyede of JAM. And during our 50th anniversary last year, we had a symposium attended by Professor Shoyinka, Mr. Femi Falana, Chief Ogoluwa Bankole, and Lawyer Femi Odunton. And here we are today. I'm not going to say much. I just want you to sit down and let's listen to our guest speaker, the Prof from Lagos Business School. You are welcome once again.
Thank you, Mr. President. Right now, we'll listen to the opening remarks of the chairman of the occasion, Reverend Dr. Tunde Lemon.
The president of Abeokuta Club, Dr. Adewale Adeola, the vice president, my Egbon from Imo, Alhaji Oyedele Akolara Jeji, the past presidents, they've recognized Engineer Odebumi, my great Egbon also, as well as Chief Lasaki. Our fathers, Aguru Adewolu Baba, Ekpefunwa, and Justice Bakri. God bless you, sir. Maybe you don't know guest speaker. Justice Bakri is well over 90 and still very healthy. Baba Aguru just celebrated his 90th anniversary. Ekpefunwa and other fathers here present. The erudite professor and guest speaker, Professor Doni Salami. I'll say more about you in a moment. And the representatives of the first president, Baba Shobo Shuemimo, all other members of Abeokuta Club here present, Ireu. I'm very, 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 very excited to be here today for two reasons. First is because for me, it's another homecoming. 8 years ago, I was here. This building was not commissioned then. It was over there. We had the lecture. And late Judge Bolaji Ajibola was the chairman. May his soul rest in perfect peace. And we had a nice time together. All the issues we discussed that day are still with us. That's unfortunate. In fact, I wanted to bring a few copies of the paper for us to see. Because we talked about debt sustainability, we talked about the size of government, exchange rate issues. All the issues are still with us, unfortunately. But nevertheless, I believe that one day Nigeria will get it right. Which is why I'm so excited that my boss, I call him boss with all sense of responsibility. I'm not patronizing him. As a young man in 1998, I'd just become executive director of Wema Bank, and I went to Lagos Business School for my training, and there was this young dashing man then who came to take us one of the courses in economics. It was love at first sight. The way he was dishing it out, I felt I could know 1/10 of what he had upstairs. Little did I know that fate will bring us together in Central Bank many years later, when we were again fortunate to have him as not just as a member of the Monetary Policy Committee, but a very, very highly prized member for that matter. I know pretty well, because you see, the president doesn't just make appointments into Monetary Policy Committee. They get technocrats, experts, and people who are very, very good in their area of influence, in the subject matter, particularly economics. And he happened to have been specially selected to come. And he gave a good account of himself while I was there. And even after I left, of course, it's only God who can repay him for all the policy initiatives that he initiated while we were there. And one thing I like about him was the fact that he does not mince words. Whether you like it or not, he will say it as it is. I can't recall, I'm sure you know it. It was one of the our retreats, was it in South Africa or somewhere, that, you know, the politicians were there, the senators were there, and he said it as it is. One of them was so angry, and he was almost, the governor then, Lamido Sanusi, told him to calm down. That the reason we have such eggheads is actually to harvest as much as possible, not for people to come and tell them what they want to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, we will have a good evening today. I know I haven't spied into his papers, but looking at the topic, imperatives of Nigeria's regeneration, I know it will be explosive, it will be incisive, it will be deep. My only concern is, please, I hope you will come down to our level. Because you see, sometimes when you read these papers, you need to go for a PhD to actually dissect and understand what he's talking about. But I'm sure he knows that people like us who may not be that lettered will also listen here. And so I'm not going to bore you with rhetoric, because you have not come to listen to me, but to listen to him. Please listen with rapt attention, and I'm very, very sure that it will be a time well spent. Once again, sir, I thank you for asking me to come and occupy a very big shoe. You know, because when I was told I was coming to stand in for Professor Shoyode, I said, Emike, maybe you have 3-4 Tunde Lemons before you can have somebody who measure up to that. I'm also very fortunate that it's when my Oga here is giving the lecture that you're asking me to come. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Tunde Lemon. May I recognize the president of Abeokuta Sports Club, who happens to be a member of this club too. Bawa, thank you. Right. Our guest speaker, as you've heard, is Professor Salami. Professor Salami is a former chief economic advisor to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria until January 2022, when he was appointed to the role of CEA, that's the Chief Economic Advisor. He was Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Kainos Edge Consulting Limited, a management consulting firm focused on market research and capacity building. He assumed this role in August 2018. Educated in Nigeria and in the UK, he earned a doctorate degree in economics from Queen Mary's College, University of London. In the past 3 decades, his work has spanned academics, consulting, public policy making, policy advocacy, and corporate leadership. As an academic, though he has been a member of the full-time faculty of the Lagos Business School, Pan-Atlantic University, between February 1998 and June 2016. He remains a member of the adjunct faculty of the Lagos Business School. At the Lagos Business School, he leads sessions in economic environment of business. Prior to joining the LBS, he worked under the tutelage of his father in a family firm established in 1979. The firm grew to become a leading distributor of automobile spares. Professor Salami served in various capacities, rising to the position of executive director. Doing then established his own consulting company, which was to merge with another to become Kainos Consulting. His consulting activities have included assignments for various domestic and international commercial and non-commercial organizations, multinational institutions. Professor Salami's involvement in policy advocacy and policy making predates his appointment as Chief Economic Advisor. In 2009, His Excellency President Umaru Yar'Adua appointed him as a member of the federal government of Nigeria's economic management team. Later that year, His Excellency President Yar'Adua nominated him to the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria, where he successfully served for 8 years. In 2019, Doyin was appointed chairman of the Presidential Economic Advisory Council. In this role, working with other distinguished economists, undertook policy and provided policy advice to President Muhammad Buhari. Beyond Nigeria, Doyin was also a member of the International Monetary Fund's Advisory Group for Sub-Saharan Africa. He was also involved in various capacities with the Nigeria Economic Summit Group. He was until January 2022 a member of the Nigeria Economic Summit Group's Board of Directors. Beyond his role as CEO of Kainos Edge Consulting Limited, Professor Salami also served as the chairman of the boards of the insurance company Prestige Assurance PLC and ARM Investment Manager, a member of the ARM Group. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Dr. Doyin Salami. Yes.
The chairman of the Abeokuta Club, Dr. Adiola, the chairman of today's occasion, the vice president of the Abeokuta Club, past chairman, distinguished members of the high table, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I must begin by thanking the Abeokuta Club for the honor that of the invitation to deliver the 2023 annual Shobo Showemimo lecture. Okay, thank you. It truly is an honor to be invited as this year's lecturer. Let me perhaps begin by congratulating the Abeokuta Club for its evolution over the years. The little that I know shows to me that this club has, over the years, moved from being largely a sociocultural organization to one that now affords platform for discussion of issues which, whilst affecting the domain of Abeokuta, also affects our dear country. It's also important, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, to congratulate this club for not only instituting, but sustaining this annual Shobo Showemimo annual lecture. And I say that, if for nothing else, but for the fact that, in my view at all, this represents a recognition of leadership. It is, in my view, arguably Nigeria's biggest problem, leadership. And therefore, for a club such as yours, not only to recognize a founding president, but to honor the legacy of such a president is, in my view, something that should serve as an example that encourages good leadership in those that follow. For me, accepting this invitation was actually very difficult. Not because I don't know what to say, but having until recently been chief economic advisor to President Muhammadu Buhari, I thought it best, upon disengagement, to take a break. Indeed, I had said to myself I was not going to accept any invitations for at least a period of 1 year. Let the new guys do what they will. We will support however we can. Unfortunately for me, Rotimi Oyekanmi is my friend. And I say that with mixed emotions. Yes, he's my very, very good friend. And so I shouldn't ordinarily say unfortunately. But unfortunately, because even though I did say that I wasn't going to do this, as I'm sure those of you who know Rotimi will attest, when he gets his teeth into anything, he finds it very difficult to let go. And until I accepted to deliver the lecture, he really was on my case. But I must, Rotimi, thank you for your insistence. Having been involved in policy advisory and policy advocacy for a period in excess of 20 years, I thank this club for giving me the freedom to choose a topic. And I have chosen the topic of the imperative of Nigeria's regeneration. Not for anything, but for the fact that as we all sit today, no matter where we are, no matter what our circumstances are in life, we can see that Nigeria, our dear country, is hurting and in need of regeneration. The moment I chose the topic, it became clear to me that I would have to address at least 3 things. The moment I used regeneration in the title, I would have to address regeneration simply means rebirth. Regeneration speaks to a hankering after a time when things were better than where they are. Regeneration speaks to an intent to achieve that which we may when we speak to the imperatives of regeneration, it means that at the very least, I must be able to explain not just when was it that things were much better than now, but why is it that things have become the way they are? And the final part, of course, is that I must offer my own thoughts as to where we go from here. And so these are the three things that distinguished chair, distinguished members of the audience, that I intend to address this evening. When I started trying to put this together, and as I said, regeneration, when was it that things were much better? And I initially started thinking, the first thing that came to my mind was Nigeria in the 1960s. 4 regions competing one against the other and making progress as a country. But then it occurred to me that if I speak to the theme of regeneration from that perspective, I would only have to rely on history. Because as it was, I was born 60 years ago. And so if I start speaking about how it was in the 1960s, then I'm afraid I will be telling the story of others. And so what immediately came to my own mind was to speak in the context of myself. I joined the labor force in this country in 1990. In 1990, I was 27. I had just completed a PhD program in England. I was happy to return home. Indeed, I turned down a number of opportunities to remain in Europe in order to return home. For me as an economist, 1989, structural adjustment promised to unleash Nigeria's energies in a way that we hadn't seen before. For me, it was as if not to return to Nigeria would be doing myself a disservice. But let me not limit it to that. In 1990, Mr. Chairman, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in 1990, the economy in Nigeria, the income of the average Nigerian was higher than that of the average Chinaman. Let me repeat that because I think it is very important. In 1990, the average income of the Nigerian was $653 per person. China, the average income in China was $386. Fast forward, 1990, that was 2000, 2010, 2020, 2022. Today, China's average income is in excess of $10,000. From 386 in 1990, fast forward 35 years or thereabout, and China is at $10,000. Our sense is she will head to $12,000 very quickly. But guess what? What happened to Nigeria? That country that in 1990 was per person richer than China. From $653 per person, today Nigeria is roughly $2,000, slightly over $2,000. And so that for me raises the first problem. What is it that happened to China, what is it that did not happen to Nigeria? Why is it that China in 1990, excuse me, was almost half the size of the Nigerian economy, and today is 5 times the size of Nigeria's economy with a population that is manifold Nigeria's population? And by the way, we don't even know what Nigeria's population really is. And so that's where I start from. That if we talk about that, as I talk about regeneration, the first thing that occurs to me is simply to ask the question, what is it that happened to us between 1990 and today, such that a country like China, that we were much larger than, is now much larger than we are? And guess what? At the heart of my argument is a very simple notion. Nigeria has not been intentional in doing anything. Things have happened to Nigeria, but Nigeria has not been intentional in making things happen for her. Indeed, even the oil boom of the 1970s did not happen because of us. It happened because of, as we see today, a conflict in the Middle East. The conflict in the Middle East in 1973, the Arab-Israeli conflict, moved oil prices to $12 from $3. And Nigeria was a beneficiary of a windfall. And so that's the first point that I would like to draw the attention of this House to. That China and other countries, Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, and by the way, even more recently, we are now seeing Vietnam, we are seeing Laos, countries that were nowhere near where we are, actually already superseding us. And as I say, the question is, what happened? Very simply put, we did not take advantage of the third industrial revolution. We did not take advantage of the third industrial revolution that China and the East Asian countries took advantage of. Let me repeat that. We as a country, yes, thank you, sir. We as a country did not take advantage of the global opportunities that other countries took advantage of. And believe it or not, in my view, this is very, very painful. Today, we stand on the cusp of difficulties. Some will say we're already in trouble. I argue that we are headed towards trouble if we don't change course. Let me put something on the table for you, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Many here, if you hear Japa, you understand it. This is the successor to Andrew checking out in the 1980s. As I reflect on the current administration and their efforts to stabilize the Nigerian economy, and by the way, they inherited an economy that is unstable. And by the way, again, the economy in Nigeria has been unstable for a very long time. Indeed, the last point of stability was in 2013. But let me leave that. What's more important to me is, as I look at Generation Z, our own successors in title, they are beginning to lose, they are beginning to lose hope in the Nigeria project and what it holds for them. A recent report published by Nairametrics, an online publication media, of a survey that was carried out amongst Gen Z, shows that 50% of members of Gen Z, Japa, emigration within the next 5 years is their biggest priority. The biggest priority for these young men and women living in Nigeria. That simply speaks to a loss of faith. It speaks to a loss of hope, and speaks to my own chosen title of regeneration. If we do not immediately work hard to regenerate the economy and the country that we have, Nigeria will now begin to subsidize the global labor market in a way that it is not in our best interest. And so, if I have already argued that our challenge is that we were not intentional, things just happened to us. It's not as if we made things happen for us. And yet, I also argue that it is important to regenerate, to restore hope, to restore faith. Then the question has got to be, what do we do? And for me, at the heart of what we do is that we are now in a new era. And this era is characterized by approximately 6 different things, or is currently being shaped by approximately 6 different things. I'm not going to name all of them, but I will name the following. First of all, we are now the 4th industrial revolution. Remember what I said, the Chinese took advantage of the 3rd. The East Asians took advantage of the 3rd. The question is, will we take advantage of the 4th? But the 4th industrial revolution, robotics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, very important, technology. But don't also forget, the world is going to be shaped by a return of geopolitical competition amongst the big powers. Today, in the 1970s, as I'm sure all of you in this audience are fully aware, Nigeria was a very strong voice in the non-aligned movement. Today, I would argue that, in my view, Nigeria's voice in the global arena has thinned considerably. Indeed, it has so thinned that there is now being formed a global south, which is the BRICS countries. And Nigeria has not even been invited. Let me repeat that. The BRICS countries are being formed as the voice for the global south, and Nigeria is not there. In other words, if we are not careful, the new round of geopolitical competition that will happen without Nigeria's participation, without Nigeria being there to shape the terms of competition, without Nigeria being there to be able to take advantage of some of the opportunities that are going to be presented. But it's not only on the back of geopolitical competition. We are also seeing a significant focus on geological, ecological change. One of the most important dimensions for me over the next 20 years that we will see globally is that the world is poised to spend roughly $100 trillion in trying to fix climate change and the ecological challenges that it poses. And the question is going to be, where will we be when such large amounts of investment money flow around the world? Will we be participants and partakers of that opportunity, or will we again not be part of this arrangement? And by the way, I shouldn't also forget to draw your attention to the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Nigeria was one of the last to sign. Imagine, Nigeria, the largest economy on the continent. The Continental Free Trade Area Agreement was done essentially with us dragged along. The headquarters is not here. The Secretary General is not here. And so what exactly have we allowed ourselves to become? In other words, in my book, distinguished audience, Nigeria, in this fourth industrial revolution, in this emerging environment where global value chains are being regionalized, Nigeria cannot afford South. And by the way, let me explain what I mean by value chains being regionalized. COVID-19 in 2020 woke us all up to an interesting reality. Yes, we knew that China was the factory of the world. What we just didn't know was just how deep that was. COVID-19 opened everybody's eyes. Even protective equipment that were needed had to be bought from China. That has pushed back on globalization, but it hasn't changed globalization. What we now have, Mr. Chairman, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, is a new form of globalization where value chains are being regionalized. In other words, the global investing powers are moving their investments closer to where the output of those investments are going to be used. Let me give you an example from a period before. In the 1970s, Asian companies, Asian car manufacturers defeated their American counterparts hands down. Toyota, Hyundai defeated Chrysler, Ford, and all of them. Indeed, East Asia, my apologies, was exporting cars to the US and importing profits back from the US. That's what the Americans did. They simply invited the Asians to a conversation. They didn't tell them your exchange rate is too high or anything. They just told them, you are creating a national security problem for us. Nothing else needed to be said. The Asians immediately changed tack. They moved their factories to the United States. They moved their factories to Europe. They reduced significantly the export of cars to these countries, but continued to import their profits. In other words, the point that I am making is that in today's era, where we are seeing the regionalization of value chains, and this regionalization is showing up in rising foreign direct investment. The question is, if we are going to be part of the globe, if we are going to be part of the growth, are we in a position to attract the kind of investment that Nigeria needs? Don't forget, I already drew your attention to something. By 2050, there will be 411 million Nigerians. Nigeria will be the third most populous country in the world. And the question is going to be, what are we going to bequeath to them that will enable them sustain their place in the world? I draw your attention to these things very, very deliberately. Because as I said, Nigeria cannot afford to be, for things to happen to us. Now we need to be intentional. And what is my own sense of what that intentionality will mean? I'm very, very clear about what intentionality will mean. It's going to be about national productivity. But before I go to that, it would be unfair to say nothing about what I consider to be our point of departure. Today is our point of departure. In other words, if I want to talk to you as I am doing about what we must do to be intentional, then I must not forget to address the foundation on which we must build. Today's economy, as I have said, is unstable. Stability in economics is actually three broad things. First, do you have output, growth? Faster, is output in your country growing faster than your population? I'm afraid the answer in Nigeria is not. In the first half of this year, economic output in Nigeria grew 2.4%. And yet, the lowest estimate of population growth for Nigeria is about 2.5, 2.6%. Indeed, the estimate for population growth extends as far as about 3.2%. So, headache one, we've got a slow-growing economy. If you've got a slow-growing economy, you are unlikely to create jobs. If you're unlikely to create jobs, why do you expect the young people to say? Second, it's also important to understand costs. Nigeria needs to be able to manage costs. Stability requires stable costs. And typically there are two costs, inflation and exchange rate. The stability of inflation, the stability of exchange rates are primary to economic success. If you are cost uncompetitive, you will lose out. Nigeria cannot, in today's age, where the world is looking for low inflation, sustain inflation at 27%. Not only does inflation at 27% make us uncompetitive, but guess what? Inflation at 27% robs us of the incentive to do anything. Let me run you by an interesting scenario. Because when we say that inflation has to be brought down as a matter of urgency, sometimes people think, oh, life is hard already, it will get harder still. I have no doubt, but I will deal with that before I move. Think about this. Yields, in other words, returns on investment are 16%. Yet, the value of those investments are being undermined, are being 7%. So it means that every year, the real value of whatever investment you are holding diminishes by 11% at the minimum. Anybody here who is a member of the pension arrangements in Nigeria will understand what I speak to. Recently, I was 60. And at 60, I had made some very interesting plans. I was retiring to Ijebu, blah, blah, blah. And something just occurred to me. Come, where's my pension? And I went to ask my pension, my fund managers, what's happened to my pension? When they showed me the numbers, it was so disheartening that after 25 years of making contributions, if I was going to depend on this pension, then, as they say, but please understand what it also means. Anybody who is looking at their pension being so badly undermined, and yet we say we do not want corruption. How? After all, once you leave work, you've got to look after yourself. And guess what? We don't even know when we depart this plane. So that's the second piece. Of course, the third piece that is also very important is the piece around exchange rates. Yes, a lot is said, I think sometimes erroneously, about exchange rates. Yes, the Naira is weak, but the Naira is weak because Nigeria's productivity is weak. Let me repeat that. The currency is weak because the productivity of our dear country is also weak. A lot is said, oh, we want the Naira to be strong. Two things I will make as a comment. First, very few people understand the meaning of a strong currency. Oh, most of us in this room will probably be beneficiaries of a strong currency. Why? Because we have international obligations in international currency, and therefore a strong currency cheapens our obligations. But guess what? It also, in the same breath, it also exports jobs because it sucks in imports. And I think it's important that the Nigerian elite come to terms with the fact that unless we improve productivity, it is unlikely that we are going to be able to strengthen our currency meaningfully. All of this that I have said, I am happy that some of the steps taken by the current administration are, in my view, in the right direction. To begin with, the removal of fuel subsidy. Yes, a lot of people, it's become hard from 200 naira to 600 naira. It is hard. Money that you should have spent on other things, you now spend on fuel. And indeed, the question is sometimes asked, why should we, a crude oil mining country, not be able to afford cheap petrol? The only reason we can't is that our borders are loose and the enforcement of rules around subsidy programs have been very lax. And by the way, there are two subsidy programs that I will draw your attention to. One is on consumption, which is fuel, but the other is on production, which is the anchor borrower scheme. The Central Bank of Nigeria, according to its own publications, lent out slightly over 1 trillion naira and lost about 750 billion of that. In other words, people borrowed money, didn't pay back, and there's unlikely to be paid back. Now, you can't do that. If that is our own intentionality, then how do we expect to make progress? I say all of this because in the short term, my view is a very simple one. Yes, subsidies have to go and have gone. But the government, in managing its consequences, needs to ensure that those who are most vulnerable are protected. Let me make that point, that those who are most vulnerable are protected. And in many countries, the conditional cash transfers have tended to be the methodology by which that is solved. Let me also then add, before I move on, that as we look at where we are today, for me, it is not devoid of hope. Difficult though it is, but it is not devoid of hope. One of the big challenges that the government will have to deal with is the challenge of bringing down inflation without undermining investment. How do you bring down inflation? There are only two ways in economics that inflation comes down. One, you either increase supply, or two, you reduce demand. To increase supply, you need investment, and it takes time. So it's not going to happen immediately. To reduce demand, on the other hand, you can't do immediately. And by the way, we would need to reduce demand. Why? Because over the last 8 years, roughly 28 trillion naira was essentially printed as the government borrowed from the central bank. That printing, and as I draw attention to people, see, output was rising by 1.7% per annum. Liquidity was rising by 17%. So imagine, output was rising by 1/8 of liquidity. Standard economics. What raises prices? Yeah, there can be cost components, but if too much money chases too few goods, prices will rise. For me, in the short term, what we must look towards is what is called in economics an inverted yield curve, where interest rates are high in the short term to deal with inflation, but are moderated in the long term as a means of encouraging investment. I will leave that and let me quickly go to what I consider my main themes. For me, there are two key themes that are important. Nigeria must be more competitive and more productive. It's an agenda for productivity that will restore Nigeria. Let me repeat it. It is an agenda for productivity increases that will restore Nigeria and regenerate her. And I am also very clear that in this agenda for regeneration, there are probably two things that Nigeria must immediately take cognizance of. The first is that Nigeria must position herself to be able to be a beneficiary of those things that I raised to your attention earlier. Remember, I drew your attention to technology. I drew your attention to the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. I drew your attention to global geo-economic competition. And I certainly drew your attention to ecology and the investment in ecology. And the question is, what do we do to be part of this? In my view, there are a couple of things. First, Nigeria must learn how to turn her population into an asset. As I said earlier, first things first, we don't even know how many we are. We must know how many we are. And in my book, the first challenge that knowing how many we are, that will take us in the direction of knowing how many we are, is very simple. I think we must begin to think about how we de-emphasize population in the sharing of national resources. For as long as I think it's 30% of the formula for revenue allocation is based on population, for so long are we unlikely to get a true and accurate reflection of how many we truly are. Why? Because it is in everybody's interest to ensure that their own numbers enable them gain access to resources. But that is one level. How do we deal with the population we've got today? The biggest challenge that the population we have today raises for Nigeria is really a very simple one. How do we make our population productive? And at the heart of that is how do we educate it? You see, one of the things about which I am most convinced is that Nigeria's attempt to manage her population is not going to be successful by any, what should we say, policy-driven agenda, the number of children. No, Nigeria's culture does not allow for that. But, you know, it is ironic. The simplest tool for dealing with that is education. Why? Because when you educate, people then make better choices. And guess what? If you have girl children in school, it delays the onset of reproduction on average by 5 years. In other words, instead of young girls aged as little as 13 beginning to produce children, in other words, babies having babies, you get to a situation where that reproductive step can be delayed until they are 18. They make better choices, they look after themselves much better. And by the way, let me also quickly point to the fact that where education is concerned, we really don't have a choice. What we must begin to think through is exactly how do we make it work? And in my view, Nigeria needs to leverage what she has and think creatively about how to do this. So let me run a few things by you. Many years ago, I remember I was a student at Igbobi College in Lagos. Igbobi College had, under Jakonde, in fact, before Jakonde, I entered in 1974. Before Jakonde, Igbobi College was a very large expanse. But with Jakonde's administration in 1979, part of the land of Igbobi College was taken and new schools created. Very rudimentary structures were put together, but they were effective. In my view, I'm not asking that such rudimentary structures are what we must use, but we must now make our education system almost a 24, certainly an 18-hour day. And this is what I mean by an 18-hour day. Some children will go to school at 7 and close at 1. Those who must go with their mothers and their fathers to the market to open up the market will go to school at 10 and close perhaps at 3. And for those who are apprentices who must spend a full day in the market with their masters, well, I see no reason why they cannot go to evening school starting at about 6 p.m. and closing at about 9. The object is really very simple. Nigeria must create a labor force that is fit for purpose. Currently, our labor force is not fit for purpose. That, for me, is the first element of this agenda. But let me also quickly say that our use of education must also leverage our cultures. In northern Nigeria, as I'm sure you all know, Islam is the predominant religion. Islamic schools are dotted all over the place. I see no reason why a Nigerian government rethinking education strategy does not say to Islamic teachers that when you have done the Islamic school in the morning, can the conventional teachers come in the afternoon? Indeed, is there any reason why the Islamic teacher should not be paid a fee for keeping these children in school? Believe it or not, in my view, it is in our collective interest to deal with the challenge of our population. Failure to deal with it, it will deal with us. That is my first point. The second point in stimulating productivity is data. What you cannot measure, you cannot manage. Let me reemphasize that. What you cannot measure, you cannot manage. Unfortunately, in the world today, data is recognized as what is called a public good, where the government pays for data to be collected and to be used by all who need it. Unfortunately for us, Nigeria's data collection and data management systems are at best rudimentary. I was in an audience on Friday and somebody raised a very interesting question. He said, Oga, they said the inflation number is 27.1. I think it is double. I said, why? He said, well, I'm not an economist, but they said that the base that they use for calculating inflation is 2009. At that point, I said, and you say you are not an economist. If you are going to be an economist, what then will you say? In other words, this is somebody who has understood that the basket on which we calculate our inflation is actually out of date. Ordinarily, that basket should be reviewed every 5 years. And so, for me, it is imperative that Nigeria has a way of figuring out the importance of data and ensuring that not only do we, that we must ensure that we do. Oh, no, not sorry. Thank you. We must ensure. No, I have a competition with myself. No drinking until I'm done. So, thank you. Anyway, we must find a way of dealing with data. Let me now move to the next piece of our unlocking our productive capacity. In my view, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Nigeria must build a prosperous, continentally competitive economy on the back of an agro-industrial base. If we cannot feed ourselves, then where will we get the feedstock to feed our industries? As I'm sure you know, His Excellency the President, shortly on assumption of office, declared a national food emergency. But guess what? Nigeria produces over 200 million metric tons of all kinds, food, grains, the like. But you know where our problem actually really lies? What is called post-harvest losses. Depending on which food chain, we sometimes lose between 30 and 60% of the output for lack of storage. Indeed, Nigeria's storage capacity, the best figure I have seen is that Nigeria can store 4% of what she produces. South Africa, on the other hand, will store 114% of what she produces. Failure to find a cure to post-harvest losses means that our dream of being able to establish an agro-industrial base which provides jobs for the children that are our successors is unlikely to be realized. Beyond post-harvest losses and agriculture, I'm also very clear in my mind about a couple of things around productivity. To begin with, Nigeria's subnationals must begin to behave in a collaborative manner. Too many states are not viable. You just need to look at the FAC numbers and compare it to their IGRs. If all we do is share money, then in my view, we don't give ourselves the incentive to actually produce. And this is where, for me, a regional think around collaboration. Remember what I said at the beginning, that when I started thinking, my first thoughts were Nigeria in the 1960s, four regional economies competing. What I think we should head for today is again a regional agenda. We are the Northwest, the Northeast, the North Central, the Southeast, the South, and the Southwest. Each takes its own destiny in its hand. When you have 6 states coming together, what it enables you to do is as follows. You pool resources. You can then invest at scale. Imagine for a moment, just imagine for a moment, the 6 states of the Southwest coming together to create a railway ring, drawing branches from the national railway line. It changes the nature of the game. It changes the dynamics. And so for me, the nature of the subnationals, it's also important that Nigeria must begin to like markets. Nigeria's policy making is deeply suspicious of markets, and I don't blame them. Market proponents have typically tended to suggest that market is the only thing that solves anything. That's not correct. I'm an economist, more than 30 years. Economics understands market failure. The point, however, is that markets enable signals to be sent that spur investment. And so for me, it is important that we begin to think clearly. How do policymakers react when markets fail? It is not to say that because markets may fail, then markets must be, shall we say, bypassed. That is why we have ended up in many of the difficulties that we have. We have simply failed to understand the dynamics and the discipline that markets impose. And yet, those dynamics and those disciplines are, in my book, very, very, very important. Having said all of that, there are probably 2 or 3 other things that I would like to say before I move to the penultimate piece of my submissions to you today. Infrastructure. We are now doing much better. But in my book, we still have a long way to go. We still have a long way to go. Look, I was looking at the numbers the other day, and you will forgive me if I don't tell you the exact numbers, but I was looking at the numbers the other day. And guess what? For all the money that we borrowed and spent on rail, the amount that the railways earn is not enough to maintain the railways. The amount that the railways earn is not enough to maintain the railways. And guess what? Anybody who understands the economics of rail must understand that nowhere in the world do you build a rail line for passengers except, shall we say, a metro. Typically, rail is built to haul. It's for haulage. Passengers are an add-on. And so until we move from the roads to the rails, it is unlikely that the road infrastructure that we'll have will be much better than what it is, because it is carrying tonnage for which it was never designed. I was saying to somebody today that in the past, shortly after the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway was initially commissioned, it used to take me, then I was much younger and much more irresponsible, but it used to take me roughly 50 minutes to drive from Lagos to Ijebu-Ode. I'd been arrested on a number of occasions, and yeah, okay, young man. But guess what? Today, from Shagamu to Ijebu-Ode is 50 minutes. That is just how bad the roads have become. Nigeria needs infrastructure. Think about it. Everybody complains, power, power, power. The global standard is 1 gigawatt of power to 1 million people. Nigeria, we reckon, is anything between 170 million and 200 million people. What that means is you need 170 gigawatts of power. What do we have? 5.5. You cannot have 5.5 gigawatts of power supplied from the public grid and maybe another 20 gigawatts supplied from generators and expect to be competitive in a global world. It just won't happen. And so in my book, it's important for us to understand the dimensions, that if we are going to get rail, if you are going to get power, They cannot be subsidized by the government. Let's not misunderstand it. Nigeria is capital constrained. And in a capital constrained economy, if you are going to rely on the government, you are not going to get very far. We are going to have to rely on forces outside of Nigeria, capital providers, to enable us build the kind of infrastructure that enables us to unlock our competitiveness. If we do not unlock our competitiveness, I fear that we will again lose out in the race to dominate. I've already made the point about our human capital, but let me make one point before I leave that topic entirely. I alluded to Japa, young Nigerians with a preference for living. Guess what? I'm one of those who say, let them go. And before you wonder, let them go, let them go. In a global ecosystem for innovation, you cannot sit at home and expect to be a successful participant in global innovation. It is not going to happen. I go back to my own experience in the 1980s. As a student in the United Kingdom in the 1980s, we had a lot of young men and women of my age who came largely from Asia. Not China, well, a very few from China, but typically it was Singapore, Hong Kong, India, Pakistan. Those were the countries. But guess what? Today, when you look at who are the global leaders of STEM, they come from there. And so for me, I am not one of those who make an argument for saying, oh, Japa must stop. What has happened, and I think it is important to explain this, the reason why Japa has become the way it is the following. Globally, everywhere in the world, Africa has the only demography that is rising. Our mean age is 19. In most other continents, their demography is either flat, aging, which means their productivity is also declining. As their productivity declines, so does the quality of life. Guess what they do? They have now deliberately made it easier for the best of our own to come to their side. They have made it easier they don't want it, but they want the best of what we've got. In other words, what we are now being cast as is the following. We've been complaining about being cast in the mold of hewers of wood and fetchers of water. Now we are going to be cast in the mold of suppliers of labor. Unless we do one thing, we must reset our human capital production pipelines such that we produce much faster, higher quality than we are losing. Because guess what? We are now subsidizing the globe. Young people here, I was surprised the other day. So I have two children, one abroad, one in Nigeria, and I know how much both of them are costing me. And so I was talking to a friend whose son is in a public university. And when he told me his school fees, I was like, really? Indeed, even my daughter who is here, her fees for 4 years do not amount to half of what the fees of the one child is. What is this meaning? It means we are training them and they are going abroad. Those abroad are not paying us for the training that we have provided. In other words, we who are least able to afford it are the ones who are subsidizing those who can. I think there is somewhere in the Bible about talent and I thought so. And so for me, it is important. Yes, let them go. Let them be part of the global ecosystem. Let them understand global technology, global innovation. But we, as a country, must refocus ourselves on the ability to produce higher quality faster than we have done so far. Having said all of that, let me move to the penultimate point that I wish to make. And that is that Nigeria must now begin to understand the importance of, how do we put this? The importance of preempt, of recognizing emerging trends and going to wait for it, as opposed to things coming to happen to us. What do I mean by emerging trends and going to wait for it? There was a gentleman whose work I was looking at over the weekend. And yes, Mario Quintana is a Brazilian guy. And he wrote, "Don't waste your time chasing butterflies. Make your garden, mend your gardens, and the butterflies will come." Let me repeat that. Don't waste your time chasing butterflies. Mend your garden, and what? The butterflies will come. That, for me, has got to be at the heart of Nigeria's understanding of the world going forward. How do we position ourselves such that the opportunities that abound in the world gravitate towards us? In other words, now we have to be deliberate. It is not the one where we wait, and if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. And what do I see in these domains? The first is security. We need to ensure, I'm not a security expert, and that is why I tend to keep away from it. But no matter who you are, in an insecure environment, it's very difficult to operate. Today, we look at food and we say, oh, we're not producing enough. Part of the reason is people can't go to their farms. And so it has become imperative that Nigeria must create a security architecture that is able to protect us and our sovereign integrity, in other words, from external aggression, but is also able to maintain law and order. And that, of course, will require it to be well-resourced and well-manned. Failure to do that, and none of the other things that I said, even if we do them, will come to our aid. So that's the first thing. We must enable ourselves to present to the world a secure environment. Beyond a secure environment, if we speak about people coming to us, remember Quintana, don't go chasing butterflies. Mend your gardens, and the butterflies will gravitate to you. What else? Security is important, but it's also very important that Nigeria as a country must, as I said earlier, be part of geopolitical conversations. Our failure to be part of these conversations mean we will lose out, and lose out big time. But you know, the last point that I would like to make is that if Nigeria is going to succeed in repositioning herself, leadership is going to be very important. Indeed, I am not a leadership scholar. I'm just an economist. However, a couple of things I will venture into that very difficult arena. Nigeria's system, as it is organized today, excludes many of those who are most capable and able to help. I served as chief economic advisor. My salary was 840,000 naira every month. Now, you have to ask yourself, 840,000, what does that buy? And yet, we say we don't want. Well, for me, at the very heart of our leadership, I will come to a couple of things on the political side, but at the heart of our our leadership conversation must be the ability of the public service to be populated by those best able to help, with the skills, with the capacities that are needed to help. If we don't pay people well, if we don't resource the places well, then too bad. I was talking to a state governor who was boasting about how the civil service in his state can be traced back at least 75 years. Well, guess what? Having made that boast, and as we retired into a private corner, he said, but they are totally ineffective. So imagine then civil services, public services that are much younger and much less well endowed. How can we? How can we? The only other piece that I will draw attention to, two things. In 2015, I served as the vice chair of the Transition Committee for the former President Muhammadu Buhari. And one evening, we got into an argument. It was the most delicious argument. What was the argument? People like myself, who had never been in politics, perhaps on the periphery of politics and, listening, and then when the heat begins to turn up, we run. But who are recognized as being technically capable, were debating with the politicians how the government should be composed. And the politicians asked only one question. We should put technocrats, Abi. Where were you when we were stoned in Bauchi? Where were you? In fact, they raised, and my mind immediately went to an experience of mine. A friend of mine was contesting the governorship of a particular state, a very tight friend of mine. And I had traveled. So as I returned, I called. Where are you? They said, today is primary. He says, yes. Where are you? Oh, we are in the stadium. I'm going to tell my driver to take my bag home, and I'm coming to say, no, don't. This is for us. And guess what? That day, I'm grateful to him for stopping me, because apparently gunshots and the like rent the place. How I would have managed on that occasion, I don't know. But the key point that I'm making is Nigeria needs to get a balance that accommodates politicians, but also enables technically competent and capable people to support in the task of nation building. My final point is this on leadership. As I say, I'm not a leadership scholar, but one of the things that I have seen, and which in my view does Nigeria no positive credit, is that in my view, the 4-year term doesn't work. When a new administration comes, it takes 6 months to settle down. It's left with 3.5 years. It has the last 1.5 years of its tenure has got to face politics. Essentially, a 4-year term effectively is 2 years, in my view. And this is just the view of an economist from Ijebu-Ode. It is to suggest that Nigeria may be well served by considering a single non-renewable term of perhaps 7 years. That way, even if it takes 6 months to to settle, even if your party will come to you, Oga, in the last 18 months, please don't spoil our chances of winning an election. At least you will have 5 full years in which to do the work. Nigeria needs to be helped to be relevant in the global environment. What's my conclusion? My conclusion is really very simple. That what I have tried to do in my presentation to you this evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, is first of all to draw your attention to my own notion of regeneration, that indeed we have regressed. Even if all I rely on is that in 1990, Nigeria was almost twice the size, the income for the average Nigerian was almost twice the size of income from the average Chinaman. Today, the average Chinaman is 5 times wealthier than the average Nigerian. What happened? And my own conclusion is that Nigeria has not been intentional. Things have happened to us. We have not made things happen. And my further assertion is that where we are today is difficult, but it is not impossible. It requires a little out-of-the-box thinking. That is our point of departure. And in departing, we need to begin to think through 2 things. First of all, how as a country do we take advantage of the emerging environment? 4th Industrial Revolution, Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, global geopolitical competition, global ecology, and the investments that will be made therein. What are we thinking? Remember my point about Mario Quintana. It is not about you chasing butterflies. It is about you creating an environment that butterflies must on their own migrate towards. If we are going to do so, what did I say we needed to do? A couple of things. To begin with, Nigeria needs to understand that her population must be turned into a positive advantage for her. And the easiest way to do that is education, healthcare. Indeed, my argument has always been the government has three primary functions. First, law and order, security, external protection of external sovereignty, and maintenance of internal law and order. Second, the government's role must be to enable Nigerians, irrespective of their birth conditions, to be able to see and take advantage of opportunities. For them to see opportunity, they must be well educated. For them to take opportunity, they must be healthy. For them to see opportunities, they must be well educated, irrespective of their circumstances. Today, if you're wealthy, your child has a better access to education. That, in my view, we must now improve the quality of education. Indeed, when people speak about patriotism, and I argue that no, it is not about patriotism. It is actually about incentives. What is it that we will say to the young men and women behind us that we have done for them that must make them patriotic? Indeed, I always argue. Many years ago, on a trip into East Africa, I was traveling with a young friend of mine. We were both MSc graduates at the time, and we chose to go to Botswana. He, British, carrying a British passport. Me, Nigerian, carrying a Nigerian passport. Unfortunately for us, we lodged in the wrong hotel. Now, we got away with it. But as I left that hotel that morning, I couldn't help but think, if the police had arrested us, this boy will get back to London. As for me, the Lord is my shepherd. Now, if that is the case, then how do we expect patriotism? In my view, what we need is to incentivize behavior that enables progress. If we are going to incentivize behavior that enables progress, I have spoken about education. I have spoken about a need to understand markets. I have spoken about a need to build infrastructure. But at the heart of it is the need for Nigeria to be globally competitive. If we are not, as a nation, globally competitive, the opportunities will pass us by once again, and then 20 years from now, I will be 80. I will be looking at the books again and saying to myself, and I did tell them at the Abeokuta Club that we missed the third industrial revolution. It appears we may miss the fourth. It is my sincere hope that Nigeria will not miss the opportunity. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your patience, ladies and gentlemen. Another round of applause for Professor Doyin Salami, please. Professor Salami, I have a 44-year-old degree in economics, but this one, Okojaya. We thank you very much. We appreciate your erudite presentation. Before we go to questions and answers, while Professor Salami started delivering
questions can
anything that happened between 1960 and now to be within your cabinet area. With all these policies and policy makers, advisors, your own time. We may even reduce it to the last 8 years or 10 years, which could be considered current. Tell me one or two policies that have worked. We all know that most policies, even when you go to seminar, either in South Africa, and you come back to Nigeria, and you advise government on whatever, just tell me one, two of our policies that we recommended to government and it has benefited the populace. Just mention two. Even to print currency, you failed. To distribute even the cash people have, you failed. Railway and something, you failed. Tell me one or two policies that you recommended as a group and follow up by government and is beneficial to the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Festus Kennedy, and I just want to say first that Reverend Dr. Tunde Lemon did not lie to us when he said you are a frank person, and you will say it as it is. I was surprised when you started analyzing the economy of Nigeria, and you happen to be the president of the chairman of the Presidential Advisory Committee on the economy. So I believe most of those policies were in your purview. So I just want to make it brief. My question is, are we in short of sound policy or inappropriate execution? Should we blame the policy maker or the policy executors? That is one. Secondly, sir, you said that you spoke about JAPA, And in passing, you said, as far as we are concerned, that pathway should continue because of the attendant benefit. And I want to add another one, sir. That when Nigerian economy is on the downward turn, faith economy is actually becoming buoyant. Will you now tell us that we should also encourage this faith economy? Because those who cannot find way to Japa or another job, they go into ministry and they are becoming richer and richer every day at the expense of the nation. What's your take on this, sir? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Tunde Oguntono. Let me join others in thank you very much for a brilliant presentation. You have to be congratulated for keeping your audience really smart, quiet for more than 1 hour. Thank you, sir. My contribution is not a question as such, it's an introduction and like thinking aloud and wonder how you see it in context to what your own perspectives are. You are very strong on economics, I understand that, but I think there are other dimensions to regeneration, and you mentioned some of them. But my own input is as follows. I want you to reflect on that. Critical to regeneration, I think, is the structure of the society. And it's a good thing you made mention of China in comparison to Nigeria. And you know what China did? Social re-engineering. They call it other names. Some people call it cultural revolution, but it worked for them. So that is one aspect. Secondly, sir, you talked about education. I think it's critical, absolutely critical, not only for development, but also for rebooting the society. I don't know if I get that word correctly, to boot computer, reboot that. In other words, you reflect and start all over again. So it's interesting that you mentioned that as well. And I wonder how you think that can be achieved in a democracy, which I think in another way is perhaps the problem Nigeria has. I'm not advocating for anarchy or anything, but I'm saying that democracy on its own and the way we practice it can be an issue. Socrates said many lunatics and fraudsters will seek power and democracy will give it to them. And that's what is happening in many countries. Okay? So are we better off with democracy? Can there be a modification of that to assist us in regenerating the country? Okay, so these social dimensions, I was looking forward to hearing that. And it's a good thing you mentioned the issue of geopolitical setup in the world. To my mind, sir, the world that we have created has got so many things stacked against our race, Nigeria included. Let's look at it. The economic structure of the world is slanted in favor of one section of the world. Even the judicial system of the world, the International Court of Justice, is skewed towards another, the same section, and so on and so forth. So you add to that the fact that our race also has a reputation. You know what I mean by that? I mean, you carry green passport, we see how we are treated compared to other passports. So with this scenario, do we need the regular type of regeneration which you are advocating, or we need something more radical than what is already at stake? Finally, sir, with the quality of your presentation and the fact that you have been advisors to government over the years, what went wrong? Thank you, sir.
Well, because of time. The good news here is that the guest lecturer is e-lecturer. So he will drop his email address and you can send the question to him. And then, of course, he will wire the answer back to you the same day. So one more question, the last question.
Thank you, sir. My privilege of being the person to ask the last question. I agree with you, sir, that most of the things that have happened to us in this country, we have not been intentional about it. You know, we are a prayerful country, so maybe we pray for those things that happen to us. And I also agree with you that we are a consuming nation. It shouldn't have been a problem if we produce more than what we consume so that we can have leverage in competition. You have also asserted that we need to be competitive globally. But how do we get to be intentionally competitive when the indices of competition in the global stage is not in our reach or is not in our hands? Let me go down a bit. The dollar is so much powerful a currency that the world seems to revolve around the dollar. There is nowhere you get to in the world. If you bring a piece of dollar note out, you see people smile at you. That currency have become an indicator of exchange in terms of business, everything. We reached an agreement with China to do direct trading, to be able to exchange goods and services, yuan, naira. At the time I was saying, why for God's sake isn't this working? Somebody told me, you have to cross over the dollar to make transition. So what it means is that how do we get ourselves away from the yoke of the dollar to be able to get competitive? The indicators of those things that we need to do to become productive, they are outside our shores and probably out of our hands. How do we then become productive with those influences not in our control? How do we then get to be intentional about those we want to do when the indicators of those developments are outside of our control? This is my question.
Right. Thank you very much. With the chairman's permission, let me start with the last question. The dollar is, sorry, can I stand? Thank you. Yes. Well, as an academic, when you start sitting down to teach, you know that you are on your last legs. The last questioner is about intentionality in competition. And at the heart of your submission, sir, is the yoke of the dollar and, many things outside of our control. Well, let me go at it this way, sir, and please forgive me. The dollar has been the global